Good evening, Dr. Mukherjee. Thank you very much for agreeing to address our students. I really appreciate the fact that you never say no to us whenever we request you to address our students and our faculty members. We all know that there are certain defining moments and dates in the history of every nation. And 30th January 1948 is one such date in our history. It is extremely apt that this date has been chosen for the nation to pay homage to its martyrs. For it was on this fateful day in 1948 that the father of the nation fell victim to the bullets fired by an assassin. To give us the narrative of the events leading up to this significant date in our history and to analyze its significance, we have with us one of India's leading scholars and historians, Dr. Rudrangshu Mukherjee. After an illustrious career as the editor of the editorial pages of the Telegraph, Dr. Mukherjee is at present Chancellor of Ashoka University. He has a large number of scholarly works to his credit, among which are his books on the revolt of 1857 and more recently his books on Nehru and Bose, and one of my personal favorites, Twilight Falls on Liberalism. Thank you very much, Dr. Mukherjee, and it's over to you.
Thank you, Amita. Uh, yes, 30th January is indeed a defining moment, uh, a tragically defining moment in the history of independent India. And I think we need to remember this day, uh, mourn this day, particularly now when some people actually rejoice and celebrate the assassination of an unarmed old man on the 30th of January who had lived his life through nonviolence, ahimsa, and had always advocated ahimsa. As Bernard Shaw said after the assassination of Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, he said, "This assassination shows how dangerous it is to be good." It is worth tracing, as Amita said, the build up to this end, the swan song of Gandhi's life. In 1945, when the Second World War ended, just before that, or the entire nationalist leadership, including Gandhi, who had been imprisoned in 1942 August, the day the Quit India movement was launched, and a dawn raid, the entire Congress leadership had been arrested. As I said, including Gandhi, they are all released after the end of the war. Gandhi is released a little earlier in 1944 because he was very ill with malaria in prison. But nonetheless, by 1945, all of them are free. That is one event worth remembering. The other event, which is very important to understand what happens subsequently, is that an election takes place in Britain in which the Conservative Party, led by Winston Churchill, is very roundly defeated, and a Labour government comes to power with a new Prime Minister, Clement Attlee. One of the first things that Attlee does, and he's in fact honoring a promise that had been made in the Atlantic Charter in 1941, he announces that by March 1948, the British would leave India. They would no longer be ruling India. So now the timetable and the agenda is set for India's freedom. The question that troubles everybody involved, all the parties involved, is what is going to happen after the British leave? How is India going to be governed? Who is going to govern India? And the implication of that question, these questions, is, is that to whom will the British hand over power when they leave? So this leads to a series of very tortuous and complicated negotiations. And underlying these negotiations is an assumption that the British rulers had always maintained in India, an assumption with which Gandhi was not in agreement, neither was the Indian National Congress. The assumption was that India was not a united country. The Indians were not a united people. India was India represented an accidental coming together of various interest groups. Congress, according to the British, represented one kind of interest groups. The Muslim League represented another kind of interest group. Ambedkar represented another kind of interest group, that of the untouchables. There were the princes, there were the Sikhs, and so on and so forth. So the negotiations include all these various parties. And the Muslim League, from the very beginning, led by Muhammad Ali Jinnah, is pressing for an independent and separate state for Muslims called Pakistan. And when he finds that he is not making the swift headway he wants to make in these negotiations to create Pakistan, he announces in August 1946 a direct action day. 16th of August 1946, he said, would be observed as direct action day. In other words, Muslims in the Muslim-dominated provinces, particularly of Bengal and Punjab, would take direct action, in other words, resort to violence to win their demand for Pakistan. The slogan that Jinnah coins for this is Ladke Lenge Pakistan. And this is exactly what happens. 16th of August sees the eruption of violence in Punjab and in Bengal, particularly in Calcutta and some of the rural areas of what is today Bangladesh. Then it was called East Bengal. The Muslims kill Hindus, the Hindus retaliate, and there is a vicious cycle of violence. Gandhi is absolutely, now we are shifting the focus to Gandhi. Gandhi is absolutely devastated that this kind of violence is happening while he is still alive. As I said before, he has always been an advocate of ahimsa. He himself led a life that was governed by ahimsa, and he's completely devastated by this eruption of violence. And he decides that he will move into these violence-scarred areas to restore Hindu-Muslim unity. So he actually withdraws from Delhi. And the place that he decides to visit or make his home in 1946 late 1946, is Noakhali, a district in East Bengal, present day Bangladesh, where a very minority Hindu population had been the target of Muslim violence. Gandhi moves there, and he moves there with a very small group, and then within a few weeks of moving to Noakhali, actually isolates himself even from that group. He begins a solitary quest, as it were, a solitary attempt to restore Hindu Muslim unity. He has with him a professor of anthropology from the University of Calcutta, a man called Nirmal Bose, who acts as his interpreter, and also his teacher. He begins to learn Bengali. Gandhi begins to learn Bengali, and Bose is his interpreter and his teacher. Gandhi chose Bose and requested him to go with him to Noakhali. And he also has a stenographer called Parasuram. It's a solitary existence. They lived in a broken down cottage, the three of them. And Bose records that often he would hear Gandhi pacing up and down in the middle of the night, and he could be heard muttering to himself, "Kya karu? Kya karu? What do I do?" Gandhi seemed lost, bewildered. He was looking for light when all around him was darkness, because some of the fundamental pillars of his life, nonviolence, Hindu Muslim unity, abhay, fearlessness, seemed to be evaporating, and evaporating very fast. People had taken to violence. Those who were the targets of violence were living in fear. And of course, Hindu Muslim unity had completely collapsed. So Gandhi is in Noakhali, in rural India, what is still India, where, and in Delhi, these negotiations are going on about the transfer of power, how independence would be achieved, and so on, who would take over the government, etc., etc. One of the principles that these negotiations agree upon is that independence will come with partition. The Congress concedes that there would be an independent state called Pakistan. Gandhi has nothing to do with it. He is in complete disagreement. And he says, "I am not party to this decision." The only person who sides with him is Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan. The rest of the working committee of the Congress actually vote for partition. And Gandhi leaves that working committee meeting. And in the subsequent AICC meeting, where this resolution, partition resolution, has to be endorsed, Gandhi actually tells the AICC, "You are free to reject this resolution and actually defy this resolution and start a movement to stop the partition. If you do that, I am with you, but I am at the moment too old and I do not have enough support to launch this kind of a protest movement on my own." The AICC does not respond to Gandhi's call, and he is actually left completely on his own, rejected by the people he himself had made. Vallabhbhai Patel, Jawaharlal Nehru, Rajendra Prasad, Raja Gopalachari, Vallabhbhai Pant, Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, and so on. All of them voted for and endorsed partition. Gandhi is completely rejected. He feels rejected. He tells a group of young people who had come to see him towards the end of 1946 or beginning of 1947, he says, he told them, I am a back number. Why have you come to me? Very soon, I will become a picture on the wall. They will hang up a picture on the wall, and on every birthday, they will garland it. That's all that I'll be worth, and nothing else of my legacy will be remembered. I am a back number. He told Nirmal Bose around the same time, I do not want my life to be a failure, but I fear that my life will be a failure. So Gandhi was acknowledging to himself and to others close to him, and this is his private mental anguish, that he has not actually been very successful in bringing about what he had wanted, what he had visualized for independent India. This is not the independence he wanted. He reiterated this many, many times. He said that an independence that comes with partition is not the independence I wanted. A freedom that comes with fear, where people cannot walk fearlessly, is not the freedom that I wanted. Thus, Gandhi is actually not. Some of you may have heard me saying this before. Gandhi is actually not present in Delhi when independence is declared. Gandhi is not part of the celebrations of independence. He is actually in Calcutta, in a suburb of Calcutta, in a very poor suburb of Calcutta, which is no longer now a suburb, but in 47 it was a suburb of Calcutta. He is in Beleghata, trying to bring peace among Hindus and Muslims by asking them, appealing to them to live fearlessly and in friendship with each other. So this is what he's doing during independence. But immediately after independence, Calcutta again erupts into a second round of violence. 46 is one round, and again, immediately after independence, 31st August and 1st September, it erupts again in another round of violence. And Gandhi, shocked, completely shocked at this, declares that till the violence is abated and he has a pledge that there would not be a resumption of violence, he goes on a 72-hour fast. And at this point of time, there are people who come to where he is living. A mob, an angry mob, actually comes to where he is living in Beleghata, the house where he is living, to attack that house. And Gandhi, they want to attack that house because they suspect that with Gandhi is Suravardi, a Muslim League leader who had been rightly seen as one of the precipitators of the 1946 August violence. They think Suravardi is with Gandhi. Gandhi appears before them and he says, "You want to kill me? Kill me." With folded hands, he said. "You want to kill me? Kill me. But I will not give up what I am trying to achieve, that That is Hindu Muslim unity. The crowd, that angry mob, actually breaks down by this appeal of this toothless old man. And they begin to bring back the arms, the bombs that they had gathered to further carry out the violence. This is often described as the miracle of Calcutta, that one old unarmed man could disarm hundreds of people who had plans to carry out acts of violence. They had arms to carry out violence. Only after peace has been restored in Calcutta, and Gandhi is reasonably convinced that violence will not recur in Calcutta again, Gandhi goes to Delhi. He goes to Delhi to do the same thing what he was doing in Calcutta. Delhi is now the center, the focus of major violence because of the influx of refugees. So parts of Delhi are actually enveloped in, engulfed by the most horrible, vicious kind of Hindu Muslim violence. And Gandhi is moving in these areas day after day to curb emotions, to restore moral, to restore peace, to convince people not to be violent, telling Muslims that you are as welcome in India. You do not need to go to Pakistan. Don't let people force you to go to Pakistan, and trying to persuade Hindus that Muslims are also their brothers. They have lived together for generations, and not to kill them. There is evidence actually that people said that if Gandhi hadn't intervened, no Muslim in Delhi would have been alive. Delhi would have been a Muslim-less city. So Gandhi's intervention here is absolutely crucial. But he's not completely successful. The violence continues. The violence continues, and the violence also spreads, not just Delhi. Punjab is witnessing violence. There's violence in Kashmir. And once again, Gandhi finds that he's surrounded by a collapse of the central belief and conviction of his life, ahimsa. There is another side issue. That is, the British have already left India, 15th of August. This is happening in late 47, early 48. When they left India, they left behind a sterling balance. There was a foreign exchange reserve that they left behind. So the Pakistan claim was that they had a share, they should have a share of this money that had been left behind. And the calculation was that their share, Pakistan's share, was rupees 55 crore. The new cabinet of independent India, led by Nehru and Patel, refused to give Pakistan this money. The rationale behind this, put forward very clearly by Patel, the Home Minister, was that Pakistan was an aggressor in Kashmir, and why should we help our aggressor? If we give them this money, they will only be making or buying more guns and bullets, which will be aimed at India and Indians. This was Patel's argument. Gandhi tried to persuade both Patel and Nehru that you agreed to partition, you have partitioned territories, so you also must partition the money that the British left behind. You have no ground, no moral ground to keep this money to only for yourself, only for India. What Pakistan does with that money is Pakistan's business. You cannot do that. So there is this side issue that is brewing between Gandhi and two of his most devoted disciples, Patel and Nehru. So the cabinet actually concedes to what Gandhi is saying and they give the 55 crore to Pakistan. But violence still continues. So Gandhi goes on a fast. Again, this is his last fast, and he thought this was his greatest fast. It lasted for 6 days, 12th January to 18th January. And his soul, the only reason he said he was fasting was to restore peace, to bring back fearlessness, so that people, at least in Delhi and following Delhi in the rest of India, people would be able to walk the streets without fear, or people, irrespective caste, creed, and religion, would be able to walk on the streets without fear. That is the only reason he fasted for 6 days. And he continued in spite of appeals from various people. Only when he received a written pledge from the various communities that, and Gandhi said, I'm willing to die for this. My life is inconsequential. Only when he received a written pledge that the killing would stop, the violence, the rape would stop, did he agree on the 18th of January in the evening to break his fast. 12 days later, in the late afternoon, he was involved in a very engaged, if not agitated, discussion with Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel in the house where he was staying, Birla House, which is today the Gandhi Smriti Museum in Delhi. He occupied, he and his entire entourage, people who worked with him, occupied one room and a veranda in the western side of that bungalow. And in that room, on a mat covered by a white khaddar sheet, Gandhi used to sit, spin, meet people, have his meals, do his work, write his letters, everything. That was his, if you like, his office. Or what he said, it was his ashram, even though it was one room. And it was here in the late afternoon that he was involved in a very engaged and, as I said, engaged or even agitated discussion with Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. Now, we have no record of what they were discussing and why both of them were so concerned and so agitated and so involved. They were completely oblivious of the surrounding. We don't know why, what they were discussing. 5 o'clock was always Gandhi's appointed time for the evening prayer. He had a prayer meeting in the evening, every evening. And the clock was ticking away towards 5, but they were still involved in this discussion. And Abha and Manu, who used to look after, the two girls who used to look after Gandhi, who Gandhi called his timekeepers, were trying to draw Gandhi's attention to the fact that it was already 5 o'clock. Gandhi finally realized it was past 5 o'clock, and he told Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel he had to go now because he was going to the prayer meeting. And he walked with Manu and Abha on two sides of him towards the lawn at the back of the house where the prayer meeting was to be held. It was while he was walking there that Nathuram Godse came out of the crowd and shot him at point blank range. 3 bullets through the heart. Bleeding, Gandhi fell to the ground with the name of Rama on his lips. His body was brought back, his dead body was brought back to that room where he lived, which he had left a few minutes before. One of the first things that Mountbatten, who was the Governor General of India then, did was to announce that the assassin of Gandhi was not a Muslim. Godse was apprehended right on the spot. He even did not resist arrest. He thought he had done something heroic by shooting an unarmed old man. A fine kind of heroism, I must say. So Mountbatten announced immediately that the assassin was not a Muslim, because if it had been a Muslim, Delhi would have erupted. The fear was Delhi would see a fresh round of communal violence. And the word, of course, spread that Gandhi was dead. And Nehru arrived, Patel arrived. And eyewitnesses say that they broke down. Nehru fell at the feet of Gandhi's dead body, and eyewitnesses say he sobbed like a child. But this was not just a time to cry. Mountbatten reminded Nehru that as the Prime Minister of India, he had a duty to perform. It was he who would have to tell the nation that Gandhi was dead. And from the top of a truck with a microphone in his hand, Nehru announced to the people of India that Gandhi was no longer alive. And the phrase that he used was, "The light has gone out." That light has never been relit in our lives since 1948. We still live in darkness. Thank you.